So I want to talk in this video about the game that's being played in Ukraine. And it's not a game, I recognize that it's serious, but I want to use games as a metaphor to understand what's going on. My name is Darren Gertis. I'm a professor, and I try to understand and help you understand context in the war in Ukraine. So I try not just to talk about what is happening, this happened on the battlefield, that happened politically, but the why behind what's happening. So, for example, in this video, I was talking about how information warfare works and how Russia is using information warfare even in regular TV programming, not just in the news in Russia, to communicate their viewpoints or hear how to persuade others. Like if you're trying to talk to somebody who is repeating Russian talking points, here's how to approach it as opposed to just giving them counterpoints. Or here we're talking about the Russia-Africa conference that just happened, and that's something I'm going to be using today as we're talking about the games that are being played. Sometimes I think that what Russia thinks it's doing is playing solitaire. And the reason that I say that is because solitaire is a simple game where it's just you and the cards, right? You get to choose your best move and it's in isolation. But what they're really doing is playing checkers or chess. In checkers or chess, you make a move and then your opponent gets to make their move. And then you make another move and you won't necessarily like your opponent's move. So if you're Russia and you're playing chess, you get to strike with missiles and they get to strike back with drones, and then you strike more here and then they hit the Kerch bridge and then you're livid and you wipe something else out, and then they strike with a drone attack in Moscow. And that's really a better metaphor for the way that the game is played. It's not solitaire. The other side gets to have a vote in how they're going to conduct their side of the game. But I think that Putin actually thought that when he started the war, it looked something like this, where it was Russia had all these pieces and Ukraine just had this little bit of space on the board. But what he didn't realize was that by invading Ukraine, he created something that looked more like this. And what I mean by that is if Russia's here and Ukraine is over here, and maybe it only had a few pieces, but now the West, who's not actually a player, is arming them, giving them the pieces that they need in order to make it a fair fight. And by the way, if you trip over a certain wire, now you have all these other players that might be involved. And even that's not the best metaphor because there's more to the picture than that. It might be more like Minecraft or something where different people can be on different sides or align differently, or there could be shifting alliances at any given time. It's hard to give a metaphor that gives an accurate, a full, accurate understanding of what's going on. Let's listen to this little clip from RT about what's going on as Putin's talking to the African Congress. Let's
We
listen to
also
this.
share the aspiration of African states to take a more active part in the activities of the United Nations. We see the active position taken by the African Union in this regard. We stand ready for practical consideration of any proposals to expand the representation of Africans in the bodies of the United Nations.
Why is he talking about the United Nations? Because he realizes he's playing on this chessboard and he actually wants to expand that into something that looks a little bit different. He's recognizing that this is the chessboard, and so let's go back and talk about why he's talking about the United Nations.
Including in the context of the proposed reform of the UN Security Council. We believe it is time to mend the historic injustice towards the African continent.
Does he really care about injustice? Is he really like a social justice warrior for Africa? No, that's silly. What he actually wants to do, so he's been pushed out of the European Western sandbox and he can't play there anymore. He's got sanctions, they won't trade with him, and that was his primary trading partner outside of China. China will still trade with him, but now he still has to find a place to sell all his oil and gas and wheat and other things. So he's looking to Africa, the global South, Asia, as a place to go. So Africa, he's really working hard to woo Africa. And you'll see this in more of what we're talking about. But he's kind of at odds with himself in the way that he's playing the game because of the moves that he's making. We'll see what I'm talking about in a moment.
Distinguished colleagues, we have to admit the fact that the situation in numerous African regions remains unstable. We still see unsettled international and ethnical conflicts, acute political, social and economic crisis. This is the grave heritage of the colonial era.
Okay, so he's going to blame the West for that because we didn't colonize, they did. No, Russia colonized its neighbors. They didn't colonize in Africa for the most part. There was a little incident once, but that was it.
Of the policy to divide and conquer of the Western metropolis in Africa. Terrorism, the spread of extremist ideology, transnational crime and piracy all hinder the continental development. To counter these threats, Russia...
He didn't mention anything about Wagner being on the continent either and the damage that they've done. By the way, what Wagner does is they go in, they work for a president or a warlord, and then they're a conduit to sell Russian arms and ammunition to whoever Wagner's working for. So it's kind of like a mafia kind of scenario.
Russia also offers its assistance. We stand ready in active cooperation between the law enforcement bodies and the special services of the Russian Federation and the African countries.
Okay, so why is he so hip to wooing Africa? Because he needs them. And he doesn't just need them to sell his grain and oil and gas to. He needs them for a vote that can counterbalance as a bloc in the UN. And he's doing his level best to persuade them and get them on his side. In fact, this is a Nigerian magazine, Pulse. Putin woos African countries by forgiving $23 billion worth of debt. So that's another way he's doing it. And he promised free grain, and he's going to ship the grain for free to a number of different countries. So he's really, really working on this charm offensive. Now, at the same time, you hear stuff like this. This was one of the propagandists talking about wheat. And, now remember, they destroyed Ukrainian grain silos and port systems. And so they're really taking Ukrainian grain off the market. And that is going to create a system where the prices are going to rise. But Russia can give that wheat to its friends. If you're a friend, you can get it. Listen to this or watch this. How much money will this mean for them? How nervous they are? 12 Russian missile carriers take off. And someone in Beijing or Algiers breaks out in sweat. They understand that an increase of 17% is just a start. It will later become 27 or 37 or maybe more. Russia is not backing down. That's right. African leaders are not idiots. In fact, the South African leader was talking about something like, hey, you need to restart this grain deal because he realizes now we're going to be beholden to Russia, right? That's the scenario that they're going to find themselves in. If they want, like these African nations, if they want this grain, it'll come, but with strings attached. You better vote the right way in the UN and vote with Russia when the West has their votes about whatever's going on. And so I think that they're wise to the game. They understand that the game that's being played is something more like this. If this is Russia and this is Ukraine, here is maybe NATO standing off on the side, unaligned powers over here that maybe lean pro-NATO, unaligned powers over here that may lean, like China and India, may lean pro-Russia. And then there's Africa over here. Well, what will Africa do? Africa's in a really interesting position. They just got $23 million worth of debt, or $1 billion worth of debt relief. They just got a number of countries free food, free grain supply, but now the price for everyone else, everywhere else, is going to rise, and Russia knows that it's fighting a hybrid war with food, like with food insecurity. And so that doesn't make you look like the good guy. So but they at least recognize that the game is not solitaire, right? It's not this. It's something more like this. It's not even what they were hoping for, that it was going to look something like, well, that, right? So it's a very complicated geopolitical game, and I think Putin understands this more than he did initially, and he's trying to bring these pieces into play, at least politically, not militarily necessarily, not even just for business, but politically within the UN. That's what he's hoping to accomplish. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you. I hope that helps give you some greater perspective. If it did, if you could hit the like button so this could spread, I'd appreciate it. If this video is new to you, you've never heard me before, consider subscribing. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees. I appreciate it. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you will be back too. Thank you for caring about Ukraine.